Hello and welcome to the Counterweight podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, we'll be speaking with attorney Jon O'Brien and his clients, the Yuenglings. We will cover their freedom of speech lawsuit against a school in Florida and its implications for larger issues around freedom of speech. Join us. Richard and Rebecca Yuengling, welcome to the Counterweight podcast. Also, welcome our friend Jon O'Brien, who is your lawyer for an event that I just need to hear a lot more about. And this is what we're going to talk about today. You are in a lawsuit. It's a freedom of speech lawsuit that Jon's taking care of for you with a school district in Florida. And I know that there's a lot of emotion and a lot of controversy around this. So I'm going to just let you guys go and tell us your story, and then we'll get into it a little bit more after our audience knows exactly what you're facing.
All right. So there's two issues to this lawsuit. First is the speech retaliation and free speech rights of the parents. And then the second issue is another issue is violation of privacy that went on through these sexual identity surveys that were distributed by not health professionals, not school counselors, but math teachers, history teachers, etc., to Rebecca and Richard's minor child. The surveys were graded, mandatory. The students understood they were mandatory. And another alarming thing about the surveys is we don't know where they went. So they're not in the student file. They don't appear to have been made or designed by the school itself, but by some third party. So we don't know where the surveys went and how they're being used, whether it's for commercial use or otherwise. Rebecca, maybe you can elaborate on why this was concerning to you.
It was concerning to me as a parent because she's my child. Nobody should be asking her without my consent or knowledge to be taking any surveys or for her to have some secret sexual identity with one teacher, two teachers, three teachers. It doesn't matter. It's not their decision. It's my decision. I'm her mother. So I just wanted to make sure that she's safe, and not only her, the rest of the kids at the schools are safe as well. The parents have a right to know what's happening with their child.
And so, Rebecca, if I can, so you saw these surveys, or your daughter told you about these surveys that she was having on her sexual identity in classes like history and math classes. And what next? What was your next? And Jon, stop us where we might be divulging too much with regards to the lawsuit. But so what did you do?
I emailed the board members and the superintendent and informed them that they needed to tell the other students and parents that this occurred. Because the superintendent told me, oh, it's not going to happen anymore. Well, the first week of school is already over, so the surveys are out to hundreds of students, if not thousands. So I just made a request that they tell the other parents that this could be happening with their students, and he didn't want to. So that was ultimately our back and forth. He saw things a different way.
And I think it escalated from there. I think Rebecca made multiple statements at school board meetings about this issue and others. And she very quickly, because of her speech and the issues she raised and the evidence she learned through FOIA request, she became a problem for the school district. They were likely advised that, Rebecca had First Amendment free speech rights, but they still needed to shut her up. So they went after other targets, her husband, and the children themselves. And I can talk about the retaliation against the children first, and then maybe we can move on to Richard's ordeal. So the two minor children, one 14, the other in middle school, were in their zoned public schools, their local schools, their schools which they had gone to for years with their neighbors. And they were suddenly expelled from their schools by the superintendent and placed in schools farther away, schools that weren't their community schools, schools that weren't populated with their friends and neighbors. And this was done by the superintendent under a policy that we're also challenging. And it was done, in retaliation of Rebecca's speech. And it also violated the due process rights of the children because they hadn't done anything wrong, but they were being punished by being expelled from their local schools and suddenly transferred to other foreign schools.
John, and if I may interrupt you just for a second, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I'm so confused on how a public school, like, if you can explain, if that's not outside of divulging what's in the lawsuit right now, how could they literally expel these kids from school for something that their parents were concerned about? Like, what was their excuse, if anything?
Well, they have a policy that's illegal, and we're currently challenging, and other schools have this too, that says that it gives the superintendent unlimited power to transfer students around the school district to other schools for whatever reason he sees fit. And that's the policy that the school board rubber stamped. So Rebecca's prodding about what was going on at the school upset a number of teachers and the school district itself. So the solution to them was to transfer children to different schools and to satisfy the teachers who were upset by the questioning of their pedagogical techniques. And so the superintendent exercised that power he gave himself to, without any warning, immediately transfer the kids from their home schools, local schools, to foreign schools. So that our lawsuit is challenging that policy because it's obviously punitive and it violates a student's due process rights, right to a public education. It upsets their learning. And, if a superintendent has that kind of power, obviously it's going to chill the speech of every parent in the district because they know if they speak up and offend the wrong person, their kid could suddenly be transferred to a foreign school. So that was the issue. I mean, and how were they able to do this? I think most parents, a lot of parents who are concerned about these issues are scared to speak up. They don't have the money for lawsuits or the wherewithal. Local lawyers don't necessarily want to step up and challenge, what is often the biggest employer in the county. So I guess they did it because they could. And but they didn't stop there. The kids were transferred immediately. This is where Richard steps in. Richard had never spoken at a school board meeting. He had, never, as far as I know, made a FOIA request. He's taciturn by nature. He was a sheriff's deputy, and he knew that the school district was fighting with his wife. Again, he stayed on the sidelines, but when they went after his kids, that was the breaking point for him. So maybe Richard can introduce himself at this point, say who he is, and what happened to him once he learned his children were expelled from their local public schools.
Yeah, hello. My name is Rich Yuengling. I'm married to my beautiful wife here, Rebecca. But anyway, once I learned, this stuff, like I said, like John said, I've been a deputy for numerous years. I worked at the sheriff's office for approximately 22 years. I'm a Navy combat war veteran, and I spent a lot of time in the Navy. But once I learned of this, I contacted my immediate supervisor, who seemed to be very helpful, and referred me to an attorney who didn't really want to help. So I just asked for an appeal and sent an email, and it was denied, saying it was not appealable. And my daughter was made aware of this, and she was very upset. She was basically begging me to, "Hey, Dad, can you please help?" She's been with these same students since elementary school. She's taking criminal justice. It was her favorite class, and she was emotionally devastated. She didn't do anything. She's an innocent kid. She said, "Why are they doing this?" I was like, "I'm going to help. I'll do the best I can." So what I tried to do was file a motion off duty that, hey, I'm going to be like the mediator. It's like, hey, you're upset with my wife, but don't mess with my kids. My daughter's severely upset. And as soon as I did that, I got a lot, pushback. Basically I was told that, hey, you don't want to mess with the superintendent. He was former, Secretary of State for Charlie Crist. And I was just like, my daughter's having a hard time with this. I'm trying to help her out. I'm trying to be the mediator in between. But then I found out I was under this internal affairs investigation because I filed that motion. And I was just like, wow. And
so if I may interject here, there's different kinds of free speech rights. And there's the right to speak in a public forum about matters of public concern. And that's a right that Rebecca exercised at the school board meetings. But there's also a First Amendment speech right to petition the government for grievances. And that includes filing lawsuits. So what we have here is Richard filed pro se on his alone with the state courts, to have his kids reinstated at their local schools. And he had a First Amendment speech right, a right to petition the government for grievances to do that. That's when the retaliation against Richard began by both the school district and Richard's employer, who had multiple lucrative contracts with the school district, the sheriff's office. So there was a coordinated effort now to go after Richard by both the school district and the sheriff's office. So Richard can elaborate about that.
Yeah, so what happened was the day that I filed that motion, when I spoke to some supervisors afterwards, the amended motion, I was transferred to the jail. And they wouldn't tell me why. And like I said, then it was several weeks later, I found out I was under this internal affairs investigation as the result of me just trying to help my kid. And
if I may interject again, you can delete all this. A transfer to jail duty, county jail duty, is a demotion, and it's denigrating for someone who's worked for 22 years at the sheriff's office and has worked his way up to a pretty high level position. To be suddenly transferred to the most undesirable work there is, in an underground county jail, was a demotion, it was humiliating, and it was, again, First Amendment retaliation by government officials for Richard exercising his First Amendment right to petition the government for grievances, file a lawsuit. So,
yeah. I was just going to say that's really important, John. I'm glad you gave that clarity, because I don't know that everyone would have seen that transition, but absolutely.
Yeah. And maybe Richard, who was very senior, was transferred, down to the, down below ground to the county jail to work with people with mental health issues and awful criminal histories. But the retaliation didn't stop there either. Richard can talk about that. Despite his military service, despite his 22 years at the sheriff's office, he underwent further humiliations at the hands of his employer, which was done at the behest of the school district. Richard, you can talk about that further retaliation, maybe.
Okay. Yes. So once this internal affairs investigation was over, they told me that it wasn't disciplinary, and I disagreed with that. And I won an appeal to the major. In the meantime, while I did that, I was stuck in the worst post you could possibly work at the jail. You're like John was saying, I was with the mentally ill, the most violent of the inmates. That's where I was at. And so, and the major denied my request for appeal. So, and then once I got to my internal affairs reports, and it basically stated any further violations of these policies, with me basically doing personal business, either while I was off duty in my uniform, would result in my termination. So my daughter's still begging me for help. I'm trying to figure different ways to help out. And there's a lot of other policies that they came up with that if I interfered with any sheriff's office, dealings with the school, I could be terminated. I was just like, and aside from working the worst post, I felt an obligation. I need to still stand up for my daughter and my wife and my son, especially, this was wrong. You can't, to me, it was reprehensible to take out your anger on my children because my wife speaks out at these board meetings, and my daughter was devastated. I can't explain how bad she was. She was very bad, and I had to help her. And
if I may interject again, Jennifer, I know you'll smooth this out. Just if I could establish the connection and coordination between the school district and the sheriff's office. They're two of the biggest public employers in the county, and they have multiple back-scratching contracts with each other. The sheriffs send officers to be public school resource officers, security guards at the various schools in the county, and Rebecca and others had the savvy to do FOIA requests about communications between the school district and the sheriff's office, and lo and behold, there's communications right before Richard's retaliation between a deputy superintendent at the school district and the sheriff's office asking Rebecca to be investigated. And furthermore, we had a hearing on the issue. I cross-examined the superintendent, who conceded to deleting his communications between himself and the sheriff's office. So those communications appear to be gone. So a lot of circumstantial evidence, a lot of direct evidence about the coordination between local law enforcement and school districts. So, Richard?
Well, Richard, before I let you go on, just for some of our audience who is not familiar, particularly with the American due process system, what Jon keeps on saying FOIA, and that's our Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, where we can go in and get these public documents. So for anyone listening who's a little bit confused, that's what Jon has been mentioning when he says FOIA. So with that, Richard, I'm sorry, go ahead and carry on.
But yes, to going back to where I was saying when I was given my IA results, and it was pretty in depth. I don't have a copy right now, but it's just like basically it's just like I would have been terminated if I did anything else again. Any further violations of policy, and here I am just trying to help my daughter, and even went even further in depth. Like if I spoke bad about whoever complained, or I even felt if I didn't even laugh at a joke that this person was saying, I would be terminated. So I was like, wow. And here I'm stuck in this position. I need to help my family and support my family. I'm in the worst of the worst at the jail. So I felt, like I said, there's more to it, but it's like I put in a retirement to leave, and I still wanted to help my daughter and my family. And even when I did that, and even in their own policy, if you did 20 years or more, you get to keep your badge, your gun, and you get retirement credentials. I was denied that. And I was like, wow. I was just like, and so, but I still, even in the meantime, we found that even the school violated their own policy, but it's just like, I had to do something. It's just like, so, I ended up losing my job because of me just trying to defend my daughter for being kicked out of her school, and having this anguish and losing all of her friends for her lifetime. And she didn't do nothing wrong. And my wife just speaking out against these wrong surveys, and then my son did nothing. He's in middle school, and he said, "Hey."
I'd like to point out that in a way, Richard did nothing. So the children had no disciplinary history, no disciplinary infractions at all, and they were expelled from their school. Richard, similarly, in his 22 years, had no disciplinary history with his employer. He had a clean record, and they put him in an intolerable situation, demoting him to the worst position in the sheriff's office. And that's, when you mistreat a employee to that extent, it's called constructive termination. So Richard was essentially constructively terminated, and then he was, kicked as he went out the door. He was denied all sorts of benefits that come with his seniority in 22 years. He didn't get to keep his badge. He didn't get to keep his gun. And these are, big indignities for people in law enforcement. He likely lost rank that you get when you retire with that level of seniority. And also he lost money pension money and otherwise. So it was, they completely humiliated and roundly retaliated against Richard. So the status quo after that was kids expelled, Richard constructively terminated and humiliated, and everybody in the community knows about it. So no one is going to speak up about anything after something like this has happened. So eventually the Yuenglings couldn't take it anymore, and they brought a federal lawsuit. And I'm happy to say, because of that lawsuit, some of these issues are resolving themselves. Others still need some addressing. But the Yuenglings fought back, and I think that's an important message here.
Yeah, and John, I mean, I'm so glad that they found you. You and I have had a relationship and a conversation, so I know that the work that you do, and I know that there's only so much that can be said in an ongoing lawsuit. I'd like to go back, if we can, to how this started, and you might want to get us started, because I know there's only so much. It started with Rebecca standing up for her kids, and this consent form, or this survey form, if you will. Can you get us started on what that, like, to the extent that I know there's information that we can't have right now? Tell us what we can have, and then where Rebecca can tell us where she came in as a mother, and how this all kind of got to be where we're at today.
Okay, I think these surveys had to do with sex, sexual identity, gender, and they were distributed to minors without parental knowledge. And they gave the children, the option to hide the results of the surveys and consequences of the surveys, how the teacher would address them. They gave the option of hiding the answers from the parents. And they also the surveys also invited the students to speak further with the teachers about these issues. But the teachers who were distributing these surveys that dealt with intimate matters of sex to minors, they weren't licensed professionals. They were run-of-the-mill math and history teachers. So the idea that these adults should be speaking about these matters with minors without parental knowledge is obviously egregious. It's violation of parental rights. And I think importantly, the surveys, once the children filled them out as required, these surveys were termed graded quizzes, so they were mandatory for the students. Once they were filled out, we don't know where they went. Yeah.
That's
another
important.
thing is we don't know where the surveys went. They're not in the student file. The surveys themselves obviously weren't designed or created by the school district, but by some third party. So there's thousands of sex surveys filled out by minors now in the school district of 80,000 students, and we don't know who has that information or what's being done with it. And so that's an issue that hopefully we'll get to the bottom of. But and then lastly, I'll say that there were a lot of high profile media reports about teachers and employees at Pasco County having sexual relationships with students and other improprieties. Some were arrested, and there's a lot of these stories. So Rebecca was concerned about this level of intimacy going on between teachers and her daughter, and that would alarm any parent, I would think.
And I'll include in our show notes some of those links that you've sent me, which is quite shocking, Rebecca. So I understand where your fear came from, learning about this as your daughter came back. But it sounds to me, too, that this was something that it wasn't just disturbing to you as a parent, it was also disturbing to your daughter. So I don't know, again, John can direct us on where we can kind of take that conversation, but she came home and didn't feel like she there was something there was a disconnect in the community after receiving these surveys. Am I correct in saying that?
I can answer that. There were a whole, there were countless parents who were upset about this once Rebecca brought it to light. And, it was addressed at school board meetings. All those parents had causes of action. They could have brought lawsuits. And just at that point, because these surveys were illegal, but it was a matter of general concern in the community among parents. But again, there was a climate of fear that prevailed, given what happened to the Yuenglings and also what happened to other parents. There's other instances in this school district of principals and school officials contacting the employers of parents who speak up in order to get them fired. So, that enabled that, among other things, enabled the school district to get away with some of these practices. And also, as mentioned, there was this policy that gave the superintendent unlimited power to expel a student from a school for no disciplinary reason if he deemed the parent nettlesome or a nuisance. And that was another thing that policy was another thing that kept parents, quiet or fearful of taking any further action.
So, Jon, I want to take this like a 30,000 foot view. I know that this is the work that you've been doing in the United States, and it's new work. I think you can talk about that. I think this idea of freedom of speech in the classroom and this idea of fear that has permeated the classroom based on things like surveys and race and sex and whatnot. I don't know if this is specific to the United States. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But could you speak a little bit more on the trends that you're seeing as a lawyer who works on these issues, and where we see this kind of extremism, if you will, this polarization, if you will? It feels like it's a little bit almost out of control. And this story, Rebecca and Richard, thank you so much for sharing it. And the fact that your support and your defense of your child has had such ramifications on your own life, personal and professional, is, I don't want to say it's novel, because I don't think it is. And I think Jon would probably say, like, sadly, it's not. But these stories still astound. So, Jon, back to you. So I said a lot there, but back to you. What are you seeing? Like, what is going on where these new lawsuits are even a part of our atmosphere, our environment? What's happening?
Well, one alarming thing about the Yuenglings lawsuit that I think will resonate with maybe some of your Canadian or English audience is just the blind, unthinking cooperation of local law enforcement going after private citizens for exercising their speech rights. And I'm seeing that more and more. I know other journalists have looked into this, like Luke Rosiak, and there's other instances of local law enforcement simply doing the bidding of other political or public officials. And that's alarming to see that kind of cooperation with law enforcement. And we saw that in Richard's case. and we're seeing it in other cases. I think that's an alarming trend. The other thing is, I guess, I think there's some capitalistic motives in among certain companies to access and exploit the sexual lives of children, because that's a potential market. These sex surveys potentially could be used by, say, Facebook or Amazon or other marketers to direct products to these children that speak to their the sexual tendencies or practices they've revealed in these surveys, that, it's no coincidence that Microsoft, Bill Gates, and Facebook are often the ones funding the companies that generate these social emotional learning and sex surveys. So I suspect that there's a capitalistic, exploitative motive for getting these surveys into schools and then aggregating them and using them for commercial advertising or profit-driven reasons. That's one hunch.
I want to hope that you're wrong, because that is one crazy. I mean, that is wow. I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, because you mentioned this at the beginning, right? Where are these surveys going? That's really interesting, and I hope that when you find it out, and perhaps in your, as the lawsuit goes forward, we'll learn more about that. Because wow, I don't have words. I'd love to hear more, Rebecca and Richard, to the extent again that we can talk about this. How are your kids doing?
I just, if you don't mind, I would like to say, when my daughter came to me begging for help, I mean, it killed me. I mean, she was escorted off campus basically in tears. I mean, she did nothing wrong. An innocent kid was put in this because she had concerns and went to my wife. I mean, it bothers me to no end that happened. And
I think that's if I may interject, I keep doing this. I'm sorry. I know, Jennifer, you can edit out me from this and give the Yuenglings the space they deserve. But the way in which they went after the daughter was particularly awful. They didn't just tell her she couldn't come to school. They frog marched her off the bus when she arrived at her school, escorted her, perp walked her, and escorted her off campus at the beginning of school in front of all her friends. And that's how she exited her local school. We're seeking punitive damages for that kind of behavior. And, this was a 14-year-old girl, conscious of her reputation, treated like that by adults. And again, this kid did nothing wrong. It was all in retaliation for the mother's speech.
Yeah, I'm glad you reminded. I was going to say, if you didn't, she's 14 years old for our listeners. So, Richard, please, sorry. Tell us more.
I just want to say, I mean, that's how I really got, is her begging me for her help. She knew all of her friends, her classes disrupted. It was a tremendous disruption for her. I mean, her state was bad. It was very bad. And that's what caused my intervention. Not just, I'm thinking I'm trying to mediate, but I was just like, I can't explain how bad she was when she's coming like, Dad, please help. So it's just like, it's reprehensible that this superintendent did that to a kid, and to retaliate against my wife because she's speaking out because my daughter has concerns. It's just crazy. So, but anyway, I will say John has been a great help. He's an awesome attorney. So, like you said, we've had some.
There is some. We have had some successes. The daughter is back at her local school, and that's the result of our lawsuit and a court hearing we had recently. And so she's back at her local school with her friends. Another element is they were in the process of kicking out the youngest son of the Yuenglings. He was in 8th grade, and they said he couldn't progress onto his local high school after he finished the 8th grade, but also had to go to a non-local school, so he wouldn't have been with his friends. So that is being addressed as well. But they went after 2 kids, one in a particularly reprehensible manner. But fortunately, at the moment, the daughter is back at her local school with her friends, and now we're working on some of the other issues that need addressing.
And I'm sure that must be hard. I mean, even despite being back, I mean, in some ways the damage has been done, right? I mean, it's all been out there in public. And Rebecca, I'd love to end on you just as a fellow mama and mama bear. Like, what has this meant for you personally? Look, what have you learned? What would you do differently? To the extent, again, Jon will tell us what we can and can't say, but this is, I haven't dealt with what you've had to deal with. I've had to deal with pieces of it, and it takes all of your heart and your soul. So how are you doing as a mama, and what's next?
I think the important thing is, I mean, in our county, we're a rapidly growing county. Majority of the problems that parents had in public schools, they would just pull their kids out and homeschool them. And you're hearing the mass problems with the parents, with 5, 6, 7-year-olds finding homeschools, charter schools are full. It's become, and they can't afford private schools. And as well, God granted me the time and the wherewithal and a good group of parents. Why don't we ask questions and see what's really going on in our schools? So I did that. And, as we know nationally, it's been an issue with the parents asking questions and probing. I honestly would not take back anything we've done because it's my constitutional right. I know the many school districts don't appreciate parents asking questions, but it's our right as a public school. So I want to know what's going on. I don't think in my parental mind was I went to meet the teacher day and none of the teachers gave me these surveys, right? Because I asked each teacher, is there anything else you need from me? And they all said no. So then when you hit my kid with this, with my history, my past growing up, I know what grooming is. I don't need a book. I don't need someone to tell me. I don't need to take a class. I lived it. So we need to stand up for these kids, the vulnerable kids. If my children aren't, we're not a single family home. We're not, we know many kids in our county and counties across the world come from very vulnerable homes, bad situations. And who's sticking up for these kids if everybody's just abandoning ship? And so they couldn't get rid of me because I left my kid there. I didn't pull her out. I didn't homeschool her. She wasn't in a charter school. We didn't, put her in a private school. She's entitled by law to a high quality public education. So this was the consequence of that. They couldn't go after me. I committed no crime. I was never trespassed. There's no limit on how many freedom of information requests you can do. So they went after my family. And for me to sit back and say no, to just run away or not do anything, that's what they want. And I can't do this when these things happen, because every parent in this community should have a voice. And every law enforcement officer in this community should be able to have their kid enrolled in a public school and be able to advocate for them and not fear of retaliation or people that have jobs that they're going to retaliate against their employer. This is not America. the way they're running it. But this is America, and America says you can't do this. So I'm just about holding them accountable. And you can't foresee everything that's going to happen, right? But, I rely on my faith in God, and our strength as a family, me and my husband, just to, hold tight. There's a lot of ups and downs in life, but you got to do what's right, because I couldn't not live with myself for not standing up for the kids, the students and the parents and the great members that make our community wonderful. So
I so appreciate you both sharing your story, Jon, for highlighting this for us so that we could put this out in the public. Jon, I give you any final last words on where this lawsuit's going, what we need to do to pay attention, any advice you may have for parents in the same boat as the Yuenglings.
I got where the lawsuit is going. We've successfully returned the kids to their local school. We're addressing some other matters at the moment about the policies that enabled the Yuenglings' children to be expelled for no disciplinary reason. We're pursuing damages. We're pursuing punitive damages as deterrence. And we're trying to get to the bottom of, some of these issues we've been talking about today. The coordination between local law enforcement and various public officials and politicians. These sex surveys given to minors, where are they going? How frequent are they? Where's what level of money is involved? Is the school district getting paid to distribute these surveys? So, in addition to standing up for your rights, a lawsuit is a powerful tool for, discovering facts of a given situation. So that's what we're doing as well.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate you and wish you well on the next steps of this, I know, very difficult journey.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.